Unit 7. Listening Part 2. Exercise 2.
So I'm going to talk to you about adventure racing as my part of the project. Adventure racing's a sport you do in teams, and I got interested in this because I actually took part in one for the first time last year in the north of England with the rest of my family, and we were racing against lots of other teams made up of people of different ages. Anyway, I've done some research, and what I found out turns out to be much more interesting than I expected. The sport's been around for some time. There were races as far back as 100 years ago, and some newish ones which were started in the 1970s and 80s. But really, people have been doing adventure racing in large numbers since the early 1990s, and it's one of the toughest sports you can imagine. Unlike marathons or pentathlons or those sorts of things, where the winner's the individual runner who finishes first, in adventure races, the winners are the first team of 4 to 6 people, depending on the race, to all get over the finishing line together, and in many races, one of the rules is that the team must be made up of an equal number of men and women, 2 or 3 of each, depending on the size of the team. Anyway, it's not like just going jogging or running or something like that. These races combine a mixture of different activities or sports. Running, swimming, kayaking, climbing and cycling, to name just some of them. I've been looking a bit at the teams who win, and one of the things I've noticed is that the winning teams tend to contain specialists in different skills, such as climbing and kayaking, and that seems to give them an advantage. The races are organised in all sorts of different places. Occasionally they're organised in cities. There's a very famous one which takes place in Chicago, in North America, but the majority are held in mountains or deserts. This apparently heightens the sense of adventure and actually makes the race more hazardous because the course runs over an area which has little in the way of roads, certainly no telephones or hotels, and probably very few inhabitants, so competitors are really isolated and on their own. Of course, they do carry a radio, so they can call for help if they run into real trouble. Well, perhaps it won't surprise you, but I want to do more of these races, and one of the goals I've set myself is to go to New Zealand and do one of the most spectacular races in the world, the South Island race, where you run, cycle and kayak for 160 miles through mountains and down rivers. If that race sounds hard to you, and I guess it is, remember it only takes about 24 hours to do the whole course. I say only because some of them go on for as long as 10 days. Now that's really extreme. At the moment, I'd say that 2 or 3 days would be my absolute maximum in terms of endurance. Competitors have to carry everything they need with them. Clothes, food and drink, the lot, and if they run out, they just go hungry or thirsty. On long races, my impression is that the greatest problem is just staying awake, because there are no fixed times for breaks, so teams tend to go on racing for as many hours as they can. In fact, I've heard of people falling asleep while they're riding a bike, and that, as you can imagine, can be really dangerous. Just to finish off, another interesting fact. Many people who are at the top of their sport in other fields are now taking part because they find that rather than competing as individuals, as they've done all their lives in sports stadiums and the like, they need to work as a team and help each other, and they find this very motivating. I think there's often quite a learning curve for other sports professionals.
Unit 7. Listening Part 4. Exercise 3.
So, Hannah, what made you want to go on a paragliding course? It sounds like an extremely risky thing to want to do, even for a journalist like yourself.
Well, I thought it was a bit risky too. I mean, as a sports journalist, I spend my life watching people do different sports, and I've done a fair number of them myself. It's one of the qualifications for the job, I suppose. Anyway, a couple of years ago, I was actually in Switzerland playing golf with friends. I was researching for an article on golf courses and, golf isn't the most exciting of sports. Anyway, I was looking down the course, planning my next shot or something, when I saw these paragliders floating down from the heights. I thought to myself, that looks like fun. Perhaps I should have a go at it myself.
So you went on a course in France, I believe.
That's right. I'd actually tried to go on a paragliding course in England a few years ago. I'd even paid the course fee, about £500. But every time I went down to do the course, it was either too windy or it was raining. So in the end, I got fed up and asked for my money back. Anyway, looking on the internet, I found this rather wonderful place called Dune de Pila on the coast in southwest France. It's actually the highest sand dune in Europe, and they run courses there. The price was a bit higher with the travel, but it was a really nice place, and since sunshine was almost guaranteed, I went for it.
Great. And can you tell me, are there any advantages to jumping off a sand dune? I imagine it's rather less dangerous than jumping off a mountain, isn't it?
Well, it isn't so high, only about 150 metres, in fact. But wherever you fall, it's going to hurt, so from that point of view, it doesn't necessarily make a lot of difference. But the good thing is that the beach guarantees you a relatively soft landing. Too soft if you go off the beach and into the water, because then you'll need rescuing, although there's usually a steady breeze to keep you from going into the sea.
And what's the main difficulty for a beginner? I imagine it's taking off and landing.
The major problem for a complete beginner like myself is actually learning how to hold your paraglider up in the air, so that both sides open properly. They only allow you to run off the edge and fly when you've mastered that technique, so I didn't get to fly till after lunch on my first day. Getting your paraglider open is quite tricky to start with. It makes you feel a bit silly when you see other people happily flying around below you or above you all morning.
And when you actually start flying, how does your teacher tell you what to do? Does he fly along beside you?
No, it sounds a nice idea, and I'd have felt a lot safer if I'd had someone beside me. In fact, I listened to my instructor Chantal through an earphone. She stayed down below and spoke into a small microphone device to tell me what to do. It was generally very quiet, calm and civilised, except when she raised her voice to shout at other flyers to keep away from me, and then you really heard her.
And is landing a problem?
Surprisingly not. I was expecting something rather violent. I've come off a horse in my time, and that's a lot rougher, I can tell you. This was a relatively soft landing. The sand cushions you a bit, so hardly more of a bump than hopping off a park bench. And you're wearing a helmet, of course, rather like a biker's, so the danger's minimal.
But is it really as safe as you make out?
They say it is. I mean, there are a couple of serious accidents every year, but the people I know who do it are very safety conscious. Most sports, including slow earthbound ones like golf, have some element of risk. I've known a few people get hit by golf balls, some of my own even. Most of all, though, I was taken by the silence. I mean, you're not disturbing anybody in your rather strange, eccentric quest for thrills and new sensations. That, for me, is the best thing, and something I've rarely come across before.
Hannah, thank you.
A pleasure.
Unit 7. Speaking Part 3. Exercise 3.
I'd like you to imagine that your college is interested in getting students to do more sport. Here are some ideas they are thinking about and a question for you to discuss. First, you have some time to look at the task. Now talk to each other about why these ideas might encourage students to do more sport.
So, shall I start? How do you think a visit to the National Athletics Championship would encourage students to do more sport?
Perhaps seeing elite athletes doing their sports will inspire students to take up the sport and imitate them.
Yes, and I imagine students would see how fantastic these people look and how much they enjoy the activity.
Maybe. But it might only interest some of the students, but not others. And what about a talk by a professional footballer? I suppose that might be interesting, because he'll probably describe what life's really like for a footballer, and how, what's the word? How glamorous he is.
I suppose so, but I don't think it would encourage me to start playing football myself. There are lots of people like me who aren't really interested in football at all.
Yes, I see what you mean. And what about the next one? A weekend doing adventure sports. Well, that's just the sort of thing I'd enjoy, and I think lots of students would get interested in adventure sports if they tried them.
That's a good point. And it could be a good, fun weekend, but do you really think many people are going to get involved in adventure sports as a result? They're quite expensive, you know, and you can't do them every day, not living in a big city.
That's true. But you can always go to one of those sports centers with a climbing wall, I think it's called.
Maybe, but I don't think it's the same as going to the mountains to do these things. And not everyone can afford to do that. Now, what about a school sports day? To me, that just sounds, what's the word? Childish? We used to do sports days at primary school.
Well, perhaps this could be organized in a more adult way. You know, with some serious sports for people who were interested, and less serious activities for other people. That way everyone could get involved.
Yes, good idea. And people could be organized into teams, and it could all be made quite competitive and enjoyable at the same time. When I think about it, it could be really successful.
You're right. And the idea of free membership of a sports club is also a great idea. Lots of students would be interested in that.
Yes, but I think that would mainly interest people who already do sports. So I'm not sure it would encourage other people to start.
No. Unless it was also a social club at the same time. I think that would be extremely effective.
Thank you.
Unit 7. Pronunciation. Exercise 1.
Well, perhaps this could be organised in a more adult way. You know, with some serious sports for people who were interested and less serious activities for other people. That way, everyone could get involved.
Yes, good idea. And people could be organised into teams, and it could all be made quite competitive and enjoyable at the same time. When I think about it, it could be really successful.